America. We're kind of known, I think, at least I hope, throughout the world for our gun culture, our positive gun culture, our not only military being well armed, but our civilian population being well armed. And I'm very blessed to be a part of that. In keeping with that, today, I want to discuss the most American cartridges. I think it ought to be a pretty fun and good episode, maybe quite controversial when I get to some of the ones I think that are not going to make the list. Anyway, before we get into the topic, hopefully you have already scrolled down and hit some stars, given a rating, and if you think this or a past episode you've listened to somebody else would really enjoy, hopefully you'll send that to them. There's a little box with an arrow, you can hit that and then send that to whomever you think might enjoy it. Just easy ways that don't cost you any money to support the podcast. With that, I'm going to plug in the intro and bio and we'll get into the topic. Hello, Gunfighters, and welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting and gun-related stuff the right way with God at the center. So I think I'm going to forego the lengthy bio. Try to abbreviate it. First and foremost, I am a Christian. That is number one in my life, serving God, following Jesus. Combat veteran, served in the United States Marine Corps and the Army. Also law enforcement veteran, private contractor, state rifle and pistol champion. Professional big game hunter and guide. If you feel called to support, check out Patreon. There should be a link in the show notes. With that, I am your host, Michael Melito, and I am blessed to serve you today. What's more American than apple pie and baseball? Guns and ammo, I think. I don't think apple pie and baseball had a big component in founding our country. Firearms and militia's use of firearms certainly did. With that, let's get into what I think my list, and you may disagree with this, and that's totally fine. My list of most American cartridges. I'm going to throw out a couple of my criteria. Had to originate here as much as anything can. You see, technically, smokeless powder was invented by the French. So you could make the case that anything we have here using smokeless powder is French, but I don't think that's really fair. But I wouldn't try to make the case that the, 7.62 by 54R is the most American cartridge. It's clearly a Russian cartridge. It's from Russia. It was designed for the Russian military. Clearly doesn't make her criteria. Also, anything with a primary metric designation. We're America. We do things different. If the whole world is on metric, we're kicking it old school with the feet and the yards and the fractions of an inch in caliber. We're about caliber here, not millimeter. So this might make some people upset who really love the caliber. I'm not going to include like the 7mm Remington Magnum. It's very American in origin. However, it's a millimeter. So I don't want millimeters. I want calibers. And this is not the greatest cartridge. This is not the best elk cartridges, right? This is most American cartridges, so keep that in mind. Just because something's not on here doesn't make it a great, fantastic caliber. With that, I think, and I'm not going to do this in like reverse order and keep you in suspense, I think the number one most American cartridge, 45 ACP, automatic Colt pistol, the 45. 45 automatic. It's known by many names. Why? Because it's a historied, amazing, legendary cartridge. When a lot of other nations were running around with very small caliber, let's say fairly anemic rounds, 32 ACP, 380, which are also American, for their officers to have a badge of rank or for executing dissidents or whatever the case might be. We saw the handgun as a war fighting tool, We had a smaller handgun at the time. We said, no, I want something bigger and beefier, a man stopper. And the 45 ACP was kind of birthed. If you listen to the Most American Guns episode or All American Guns, you know the 1911 is on there, no surprise. Well, these are kind of matched together. And I think the 45 ACP is certainly as American as any other cartridge. I don't know of any other cartridge you could submit that is more American than the 45 ACP. It's served since 1911 when there was horse cavalry. And it continued to serve through Vietnam when there was air cavalry. From horses to helicopters. Think about that. It is a great cartridge. It's also great in the civilian world. There's a ton of competition shooting done with the 45 ACP, both past and present. It's still a great defensive caliber. It's still carried by a lot of people. It's a phenomenal round. It's powerful. And it's very, very American. And I think 45, right? I think that's a very American thing. Just big 45 caliber bullets. The next one I'm going to mention is also a 45, but a rifle round. It predates the 45 ACP. You might guess what I'm talking about. The 4570. The 4570 is just American as it gets. Not only was it a good round when it was introduced, it's still being used and still being chambered. In the world of, super high ballistic coefficient, long range bullets and, advanced optical sights and computer laser rangefinders and all kinds of things. This old warhorse from the black powder era is still around, and there's still guns being chambered for it. Pretty recently, Ruger bought Marlin when the whole debacle with Remington going bankrupt, when that thing happened. And I do believe the very first thing Marlin re-released was the 1895 in 4570. That says something about that caliber. It wasn't only good in the 1800s, it's still good today. It's still carried by guides in Alaska for bear. It's still known as a great brush caliber, a great large game and close distance caliber. There's even this whole market of tactical 4570 lever action Guccified with rails and all this stuff. Now we could argue the practicality of that, but we can't argue that the 4570 is still going strong. It was kind of, let's say, on life support, I think, for a while, but it has not only gotten out of bed, but it's been hitting the gym. It's come on strong in the last decade or so. It's a fantastic cartridge. It was then, it is now. Very American in origin. Now, to give credit where credit is due, I'm going to read a little bit from Cartridges of the World, a gift from one of the patrons, adopted by the U.S. military in 1873 with the single-shot trapdoor Springfield rifle. We often think about, lever actions like we see in John Wayne's hands in the movies as guns that won the West, but I would submit these old single-shot trapdoors, a lot of them in 4570, although maybe not as beautiful as an old Golden Boy or as cool to manipulate on a silver screen, were actually guns that had a big part in how the West was settled. And this cartridge that did all that is still with us today, still taking game, still being chambered in good modern rifles, and I think that's fantastic. And a cartridge that played a hand from the military's hands to hunter's hands for all that amount of time really deserves to be right up there with the most American cartridges. Alright, the next one, talking about westerns and lever actions, this one very much is a lever action cartridge. The 30-30 Winchester. It's American. It's American all the way. Designed in America for Americans. The 30-30, 30 caliber bullet with 30 grains of powder. Although it's not as old as the 45-70, it still came around in the 1800s. Again, I'm getting some of this from Cartridges of the World, but 1895. 1895, and I think it was originally called, or maybe called by Winchester, the 30 Winchester centerfire, and it, I think, premiered in their Winchester 1894. By the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter is established, so verify this before you take it as truth. But the 1894 in and of itself is a fantastic rifle. It still is. It's still in the hands of many hunters today. How many generations of American hunters have been putting meat on the table and defending their families from the East Coast to the Wild West with the 30-30? You know, it's just been around so long, and it was designed for Americans. It wasn't even designed for the military. Again, that's one of the great things about America, is that we make guns for civilians, for civilian use. We still have wild lands and frontiers, and unlike a lot of other countries where hunting is like for a privileged landed gentry or the wealthy or something like that, in America it very much still can be for a common man to put meat on the table for his family. That's very American. And that's very much where the 30-30 Winchester shines. It is almost unarguably one of the best deer cartridges of all time. And I think we do a lot of hunting here in America. From, buffalo to elk and all manner of things. But when you think about hunting in the U.S., a lot of times you think about deer hunting, right? Deer hunting, whitetail, and mule deer. And the 30-30, I couldn't even begin to come up with an algorithm to calculate the number of deer that the 30-30 has put in the ground. It's an amazing cartridge. And again, it's hard to think of a cartridge more American than the 30-30. Now let's get into some controversial discussion, because the cartridge that got me thinking about this, I later took off the list. I don't know that it qualifies. The 30-06 Springfield. You might be thinking, the 30-06? That's like the American cartridge, and that's what I thought when I was first thinking about this. I mean, it served us in World War I and World War II. It's still a favorite for hunters all across the country. How could it not be American? Well, because as much as I love America and I fought for this country, it's never okay to steal. And I think we kind of stole this cartridge, the 30-06. If you're not familiar with the story, Teddy Roosevelt and a bunch of others ran into the 7x57 Mauser, and it was far superior in a lot of people's opinions, and I think in truth, to what we had, the 30-40 Craig. It's a Spitzer bullet. It was powerful. It had fantastic range and trajectory, and we basically copied it. We didn't stick with 7mm. As I said, we're caliber. We're old school here in America, and we put a 30 caliber bullet on it. But I do believe we were sued by, and I want to say not Germany, the country, I think, but by whatever company owned Mauser or owned those patents. And this seems like it would be pretty straightforward, but apparently you need to be like an historian to figure this out. Whether we actually paid royalties or we just didn't because we went to war with Germany in World War I shortly after this. But for that reason, I'm kind of not going to include it on the list, because as much as I love America, it doesn't make it okay if America steals just because it's America. I would liken it to this. I'm in elementary school and I see little Johnny Smith playing on the monkey bars, and he's got a Sublime shirt, and I think, I really like Sublime, and I go over there and I beat up little Johnny Smith and take his Sublime shirt. And I wear that thing all the time. It becomes my favorite shirt. and somebody asks, what's the most Melito shirt? Like, what epitomizes, the style of Melito? That's me. And you say, oh, that, Sublime shirt. He's always wearing that thing. That doesn't make it the most me of shirts. Because I took it from somebody else. Likewise, I know it may be controversial, but the 30-06, if we took that from the 7mm, 8mm Mauser and just put a 30 caliber bullet on it, which is kind of right in the middle of the two, same case, and even put it in a rifle based on the Mauser, and kind of got called out on it, I don't know if I'm going to include that on the most American of cartridges. And again, I love America, but I don't want to be such a blind patriot that I say it's okay to take something from somebody else. I really hope that we paid our royalties on that and paid our dues. The patents on that are long since expired, I believe. But you get the idea, and hopefully you'll see why I didn't put it on the list. And I'll concede that I think that 30-06 is probably the best all-around hunting cartridge on the face of the earth. But it doesn't make the All-American cut. Likewise, for a simpler reason, the 6.5 Creedmoor is not on the list. Based on the 30 Thompson Center, American, designed here in America, named Creedmoor for the Creedmoor matches here in America, but it's a 6.5. And as much as I love 6.5, and I think it's a fantastic caliber, and it took us a long time to warm up to it, because the 6.5x55 Swede has been around since the 1800s, it's a 6.5. And again, I said millimeters are out, so 6.5 Creedmoor's out. Likewise, the 308. Now, it is based on the 30-06. So if I take that same t-shirt and cut the sleeves off of it, is it now mine? Because we took the 30-06 and we made it a little bit shorter, made the 308 and then the 7.62x51 NATO. I would say even so, I probably wouldn't include it on the list. I think it is probably the most well-balanced rifle cartridge, period, for both tactical application, defensive use, and hunting. It is a fantastic all-around caliber. Again, I think the most versatile of rifle calibers. But I don't think it deserves the most all-American spot. It served as an American military arm for a very, very short amount of time. Although it's still chambered in machine guns. The 240 Bravo, 240 Golf. Fantastic guns, but in the hands of the American grunt, the American warfighting rifleman, it had a very short service life. It served in other countries' hands in like the FAL far longer, or the G3, than it did in American grunts' hands. The M14 was really the only mass issue infantry rifle we chambered the 308 in, 7.62x51 NATO, and it had a very short service life. I did a quick search and again verify all this information, but 1957 and 1964 as the standard U.S. service rifle, that's a pretty short-lived thing. And we have a lot of great rifles chambered in it, and it may be, I don't know if it is more popular than the 30-30 or the 30-06, but it's certainly right up there in the top 3. It's a great cartridge. It's a great hunting cartridge, and again, I think it's probably the most well-balanced of do-it-all rifle cartridges, if there is such a thing. But I'm not going to put it on the All-American list. If you want another American service rifle cartridge on the list, how about the 223 or 5.56x45? I'm going to call it the 223. Now, I know there's some differences. I know 5.56 is loaded to higher pressure. But again, if we're going to call it American, we need to use American caliber and not this European metric stuff. Based, I believe, loosely on the 222 Remington and beefed up, it kind of is an American thing. There was a lot of intermediate cartridges before this. We can't claim to be the geniuses of intermediate cartridges, but we kind of can, I think, take credit for the very high velocity small bore intermediate cartridge. When you had things like the 8 Kurtz in World War II, and you had the 7.62x39, which is a great round, great intermediate cartridges. In our own prior intermediate cartridge, the M1 carbine, this kind of very small bore for a warfighting cartridge, 22 caliber, very high velocity. Again, loosely based on the 222 and kind of beefed up a little bit to the 223. That's American. And it's still being used by us right now as our main service weapon since 1964. So a much, much better track record in the hands of the American grunt rifleman. What I carried in war, and a lot of other countries adopted it because it's a good round. It was a good philosophy. Carry a lot of lightweight ammunition, high velocity, small caliber. And talk about America, the AR-15, it doesn't stand for assault rifle. It stands for Armalite rifle. But it kind of also is a good thing to think of it as America's rifle, because it really is. It is likely, especially since the assault weapon sunset, probably the most popular platform, and you could get down a whole rabbit hole on what is and what is not an AR-15. But loosely speaking, if you include a bunch of categories, the AR-15 and the 223 5.56 is probably the most popular currently being made and chambered, both in rifles and round per round centerfire rifle production. You'd have to go and verify that, but I would have a hard time thinking that anything else was more so than the 223 5.56. It's fantastic. It's American. It's original American. So I'll concede that one as one of the most American of cartridges. Now let's get to ones I think are quintessentially American. We think of America, we think of lever action rifles. I think we also think of revolvers. Obviously other countries use revolvers, the Webley, but we really use revolvers. We think of revolvers, I think, as American, and a lot of Americans still use revolvers for hunting and for defense. We talked about that powerful 45 ACP, but what about the powerful 44 Remington Magnum? When 44 Special just isn't powerful enough. You think America, you think Dirty Harry. You think of that big old Smith & Wesson Model 29. It's a very American round. It's a very American thing to do. For, Elmer Heath and some others to think, let's shove some more powder in here and see how far we can push the envelope. Maybe blow up a gun and say, yeah, that's a little bit too much. Kind of Americans hot rodding these cartridges and coming up with something great. The 44 Remington Magnum. 44. I'd say the 44 Remington Magnum is a very, very American cartridge. And if I put that one on the list, I have to put the Magnum that kind of preceded it, the 357 Magnum. Kind of a similar thing with the 38 Special. Like, how can we make this thing more effective? And it's kind of known, I think, and legendary for good reason, for handgun stopping power, for law enforcement. Now, 44 Remington Mag is obviously more powerful, but it's kind of too big to be chambered in, despite what Dirty Harry would have you believe, common police sidearms. But the 357 absolutely was, for a long time, carried by American law enforcement. It's also still a popular defensive cartridge and hunting cartridge. I'd submit that a Colt Python in 357 or, any of the common Smith & Wesson in 357 Magnum, it's just, I think, a great American thing. A wheel gun. A powerful dual-purpose defense and hunting caliber. And I think that's pretty American. So I think that's going to round out my list of most American cartridges. Again, not best cartridges, not whatever, most American. And again, going back to the beginning, I think 45 ACP, 4570, 3030, those are fantastic all-American rounds. Both in origin, in use, in longevity. And I think it'd be hard for anything to supplant those as more American. And again, I think it's something quintessentially American. Guns, firearms, and not just in the military, because a lot of countries have a great military kind of heritage with firearms. But America, we also have a great civilian tradition of firearms and firearm ownership. It's one of the great things about America, I would submit. We even have it guaranteed in our Constitution. We think about the Revolution. militia played a big part in that. Civilians taking up arms against arguably the best fighting force in the world at the time and prevailing, because these civilians, they knew how to handle a gun. Likewise, I submit, if you want to make America great again, make it well armed again. You have the right guaranteed to you by the Constitution of the United States to keep and bear arms, and that it shall not be infringed. Are you exercising, are you appreciating that right? It's a wonderful gift. Gifts are meant to be enjoyed and appreciated and shared. If you have somebody in your life, I would submit, that you can introduce to firearms, maybe take the time and do that. Tactical tip of the day. This has nothing to do with guns or cartridges, unless you have some in your bug-out bag. Recently been doing some rucks, some hikes with a pack, whatever you want to call it. God willing, I hope to be going and living in Alaska soon. And I plan to do quite a bit of hunting there and hiking around, being in the wilderness with a pack. And although I'm blessed to be in very good shape, carrying a pack is different and use different muscles in different ways than you would normally without a pack. So I've been doing that a little bit. And before I forget, I wanted to throw it in as a tactical tip. If you don't keep a pair of good footwear for hiking, I assume you have a bug-out bag or something like it, whatever you want to call it, an inch bag, a bailout bag. If you don't carry a pair of good footwear, carabiner to clip to or inside that pack, I would highly encourage that. I podcast for a living by God's grace now. So I generally carry pretty good footwear if I had to bug out at a moment's notice. But if you don't, if you wear dress shoes or whatever kind of shoes and you want a different kind for that, if you own them, why not have them carabinered to that pack? So that if you have to, you can grab the pack and just real quickly go with whatever you're wearing, but when you get a chance, stop and put on those shoes, having them clipped to your pack. And I shouldn't have to say this, but if you have a pack like that, one of the primary things you should have in there, good socks, and a couple pair. So often I think we get wrapped around the axle on this magazine versus that magazine, or how many rounds do I need, or is this knife really the optimal one for my bug-out bag? What about socks? If you've ever had bloody feet, it's pretty nasty and painful. If you can avoid that by having fresh socks to change into, you have that carabiner on the outside of your pack and it's not raining, you change out your socks, you can put your other ones on the outside of that carabiner to let them dry out. Getting a little bit off topic, have a carabiner with a good pair of footwear attached to that pack, unless you have them already in your pack. Whatever that footwear is for you, whether it's trail runners or combat boots, whatever you want. And have some extra socks. That's your tactical tip of the day. Your tactical verse of the day. Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken away from them. This is spoken of after the parable of the talents. The ones who use the talents wisely and multiply them are commended, and the ones who are fearful and don't use the talents given to them, they're taken away from them and given to the ones that are using them. Make sure you're using your talents. If you're given a gift, you should use it and appreciate it. Whatever God's given you, hopefully we're all using it for the service of God and becoming better in it and walking it out. With that, men, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.